It's interesting when I listened at the video and when I was asked to talk on this topic, I said, you know, I'm going to talk on, because I really cannot talk on the whole fees must fall debate, because as you all know, we are, maybe I must just talk without this, it's just making a bit of a noise. As you all know, there's a lot of processes happening on national level in terms of this whole debate, the funding and so forth. And for us as DMT to now come and express, I mean, we've got a view in terms of the support of the plea from the students and so forth, but from a university or faculty's perspective, we are very much dependent on a budget, you know. So when I was asked, I said to Edward, I will give you a view on the university and the faculty from a budget perspective, because at the end of the day, it's important that we have to bring the two processes together. So, you know, if we talk about fees must fall, what does it exactly mean? If we're talking about free education, it has got direct implications. Funding must come from somewhere. And if that is the case, then that funding must still flow in such a way that universities are able to sustain itself. So my approach for today was to give you a view on what is the realities in which a university or any business for that matter would have to operate in order to sustain ourselves. Because we are not an island on ourselves. We are also part of an economic system, and we are also subject to economic forces in terms of increases, inflations, and so forth. And I think it's important that we just give you a view on what is the realities, and that's why I've called it Budget Realities for 2017, that I'll just give you an overview of where are we standing and what is the implication of this year's 0% increase that we have to absorb. And then at the end of this, then we can talk about it. So I think that would be my approach. But please feel free to make notes and then we can discuss it. So for this current 2016 year, the reality is as a result of the 0% increase, the university had a 113 million rand shortfall on the budget. And that is as a result of the 0% increase. So in terms of the main budget, and let me just quickly explain what we mean by the main budget. Universities are funded in terms of different funding streams, and I'll show you a bit later the third income stream, and I think most of you in the postgraduate environment are very much involved with research, and you've got a good grip what it means third income, because most of you are also involved with third income projects, research projects and so forth. But main budget basically is two streams. It is the subsidy that the government pays to the university, the subsidy for having students, and then the student fee component. That makes up the main budget. And then there's the accommodation budget, which is a completely loose budget on its own for the students that stays in residences. So the shortfall for Stellenbosch was 113 million rand for this year. Of that 113 million rand, the government then stepped in and said they would carry some of that cost. It was in the order of about 75%. So 79 million rand was then funded by the National Department of Higher Education to absorb the shortfall. The council then had to step in, and from the balance, 10.4 million were cut from institutional costs. Now, institutional costs is money that in the main budget there's institutional expenditures. Things like, for instance, insurance, rates and taxes, you know, costs that any organization will incur on an institutional level. So there was cuts made in that budget, which just meant that the ability of the university to carry those costs had to be cut. Then 15.2 million from the council's discretionary funds, and just to give you an example of what that means, there's funding that comes into university that is under control of the council. So a donor would, for instance, come and say, I'm giving money for bursaries to the university, and that money would then be governed by the council, but it is ring-fenced for specific application, so you cannot use that money. But then there is some funding which people will also give to the university, which they say that the council is discretion and they can decide how they want to apply those funds. So the council can then on an annual basis say, well, we are prepared to make some money available for this and that. Like for instance, this backlog maintenance project of the faculty, some of you that have been here for a few years would have seen that we've gone through a process, we need to finish. This lecture hall is an example. Close to 300 million rand was spent on this campus over the last 6 years, and that has come from discretionary funding which the council has made available for the improvement of the faculty, of the campus as a whole. And then 8.3 million came from accommodation reserves. Reserves also then being built up for like maintenance in accommodation and so forth. And that is how it normally goes, you know. You build up reserves over a period of time and then you use that as the reserves to then improve your accommodation or build new accommodation. So once again, from the reserves we use in order to balance it. So the total shortfall for the sector for this year was 2.33 billion rand, and the government has undertaken that they would for 3 years support the institutions with that shortfall, because you can imagine it has a carry-through effect. If you this year have a 0% increase, but your budget is higher based on what your increase would have been, then there's a shortfall. So the government is making the shortfall good for 3 years. The question, of course, is what happens after 3 years. But there you can see for this year it's 2.33 for 2016. For next year it would be 2.6, and then 2.8 billion rand for 2018. So the government will for 3 years compensate higher education institutions. So when the university started with its budget planning for next year, they looked at 3 scenarios, and this was early in the year before the council and before the latest developments in terms of what the minister announced. But the university built through 3 scenarios. So one was if you were to go for a 0% increase again, an increase with CPI, which as you know is a consumer price index, which is in the order of about 6.3%, and then an increase equivalent to HEPI, and that is what we call the higher education price index. And the reason for that is higher education has got a higher index for inflation than you would find in the CPI, and that is very much linked to the nature of our business. You know, a lot of our like library costs is linked to international exchange rates in terms of we have to bring books in from overseas. We've got a large component of salary costs linked to our expenditure higher than you would find in other sectors, and all of that is contributing that higher education institutions have a higher CPI or a higher inflation rate than what you would find the CPI, and because the CPI is a basket of goods which the government uses to determine inflation, and higher educations are higher as a result of the nature of our business. So and that was the 3 scenarios. Now it's just not sustainable over time. So if you look at the level student fees will have to increase in order to keep universities sustainable, and this is the case of Stellenbosch, then you would see for next year it should have been 8.13, and then after that significantly higher. And I'll show you the reason for that is purely because of the block grant. So if you take the main budget, the main block grant accounts for about 66, if you just take those 2 streams, the block grant and the subsidy, not the subsidy, the student fees. Student fees is approximately 30% of those 2 components, and 70% is the block grant. Now, if the block grant is only increasing with 2 to 3% per annum, that is skewing the whole process, and that is part of this whole debate of fees must fall in terms of government not making sufficient funding available for higher education. You would have most probably read in the papers that currently the government's contribution for higher education is 0.7% of what is it, Nico? What is that?
Good.
The national,
It's called GERD.
yeah,
G-E-R-D.
so if you look at internationally, and other countries, it's in the order of about 1.2% to 1.3%. So our country is currently putting, in terms of the, so now it's bothering me, the word just slipped me, Nico, well, he's very good with Google. He knows Google very well, so he'll quickly get it for me. But the problem is that the government is not putting sufficient funding into education, and as a result of that, the
Gross domestic product.
that's correct. GDP. That's sorry. So currently, only 0.7% of GDP is going into higher education, whereas internationally it's in the order of 1.2, 1.3, and in some of the developed countries even higher. So that is a key aspect that will have to be addressed, because the block grant is just not sufficient to fund higher education institutions going forward. Okay, so I thought it's also important to just give you then an indication of what is the macro financial assumptions that plays into the budget when a budget is put together annually. You will see, for instance, that in terms, the first line, in terms of inflation, there you can see what the inflation, projected inflation was 6.2 and actually 6.8. For next year, it's envisaged to be 6.4, and then it will smooth down a little bit. And that this is according to the Bureau of Economic Bureau of Economics onderzoek. What is the onderzoek in Engels? What's the English name for it? Investigation, something like that. That's that center at Stellenbosch linked to the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences, and all they do is they do analysis and they analyze the economy and they look forward and they do projections and so. So this is based on the projections they've done for the university. If you look at the FTE student growth, you will see that for this year, we planned for a 4.31% in the FTEs. It was only 3.97%, so the undergraduate students, in fact, were a bit lower, but then the postgraduate students were, in fact, higher. What is actually interesting and what you should look at is at the student heads, where the growth was in fact planned for 2.33, and it in fact was 2.61%. Now all of that of course has an implication in terms of your running of your business. More students means more institutional costs, it means more support, it means more indirect costs and so forth, and that of course creates a problem. Keep also in mind that new students is not funded. What happens is we every year have to give a 5-year projection to the department in terms of what we call enrollment planning. So if we at this faculty say this is the number of students we are taking in, postgraduate, undergraduate, based on the funding envelope which is available, the government then allocates the grants to the universities. So if you exceed your student numbers, then you are what we call, you've got unfunded students. So the government doesn't fund those students. All you then get is the student fees for that particular students which are unfunded. That of course also puts pressure on the infrastructure, because it means that your cost for that student is significantly higher than what the student fees would be. So that is also a challenge, and as you know, the government on the one hand says you have to take in more students, which university has done, but then the money also doesn't flow with that particular request. Okay, then in terms of exchange rate, this is the projected, in fact it is currently a bit better than what they projected for this year. They projected a dollar of 15.5 and a euro of 17.16. And you can see what is the projection going forward. Now, of course, this has a direct impact in terms of when you buy plywood bricks or anything that you import. And you that's involved in the research environments would know, if you buy equipment, what is the cost of buying equipment if you import it. You know, you have to buy it at the exchange rate, and then you still pay a lot of import duties and so forth. So that is all contributing to a higher inflation for an institution, especially in a research environment like we are. Then you can see also building cost inflation. It's actually it has come down a bit, but that's a reality. So every time when you build a new lab or whatever, there's inflation linked to that, in fact it was more than 10% a year or two ago. It's has in fact come down. Then this is the two most important aspects that we have to take cognizance of, is the increase in the block grants that we get, and this is where the problem comes in. You can see here that for 2016, the projected budgeted increase from the department was 4.47. The actual allocation, it was budget 3.11. It is 4.47. But for next year, it is only budgeted at 1.73. Now, as a result of that first slide, which I showed you, those 3 years, so it will be next year 11.19, but that is as a result of that additional funding that is coming into the system. But going forward, you can see that the allocation that we've received from the department, the indication so far, because they also work in a 3-year MTEF cycle, and they give you sort of an indication, not a fixed amount, but they give you more or less. The indication so far is that going forward, the block grant will increase by 2.49, 2.37, 3.6, 3.5. Keep in mind, inflation is running at 6.5%. This is the envisaged or block grant that we foresee that will come to us. Now, I must just say this was done before the recent announcement by the President that the Commission will make their report known towards June, July next year. And so there's a lot of uncertainty because we're not getting clear indications from government at this point of time in terms of what is happening with this Commission, looking at how fees must fall, looking at funding of higher education. So we trust and we hope that this is business as usual. We trust that from that process currently underway, that government will reprioritize their funding, and that by June next year we get hopefully good news in terms of the funding of higher education, which must address the block grant issue, because that is where the problem lies. Government will have to increase the block grant in order to make higher education affordable. So it's important that we just look at this, because currently this is the realities with which the university has to budget. You have to balance your books, and your balance is between your student fees and your block grant. Okay, so that is important. Then this is actually quite interesting. This is a slide just to show you where the total budget of the university currently stands. So currently the university's total budget is a 5.3 billion rand, 5,319 billion rand budget. What is quite interesting to look what is happening with third income. As a result of the decline in the subsidy, the third income has become a key aspect for universities to be able to sustain themselves. So you would see that student fees is currently only contributing 16% of the total budget of the university. And accommodation 6%, but I mean for the purpose of the argument you can exclude accommodation because it is for those students that are staying in residences. But the state subsidy has dropped and is currently at 23%, and that is a key aspect that needs to be addressed. So 55% of the university's funding is already coming from third income. That is like grants that we generate, which we for research purposes. It is donations, it's bursaries, etc., etc. So quite interesting. This faculty's third income is already 40% of the university's total third income, which is a huge component of the university's budget. So it's important that we just have to watch this, because without third income, this faculty specifically would not have been able to sustain our level of expertise. It would not have been able to support our core business in terms of research and teaching the way we have done it so far. And it is predominantly as a result of third, and maybe Nico, you would also like to also maybe refer to that, you know. And that's why we're also so pushing so hard for the new FISON building, you know, because most of you coming from that area would know that it is not sufficient and it's not able to sustain our research and our third income going forward. So in terms of the integrated budget, just to show you what is currently the situation. So the main budget amounts 24% of the total budget is the main budget, which is then the block grant and subsidies. The third and the fourth income is already 51%. And as you can see, you know, the third income is becoming key to the success of the university, but specifically the faculty. Okay, just to show you the main budget component, that 24%, how the budget then is distributed, and I'll give you more details, but the faculties get 42% of that. Then the institutional component is 30%, and that is the money that, as I said, you know, that would go towards insurance and maintenance of buildings and rates of taxes, all those institutional components. The green is 20% is the professional support services. That is like your HR and your finance and those environments. And then there's a small strategic component which is used for strategic expenditure within the university. So back to our faculty, and I hope you can see it. It's a bit small, but what I try to do here is just to show, for if we were to get 100 rand. So keep in mind that 47%. So if we generate 100 rand, and in fact that figure, this is the 2005 figure which we did the end of last year. So if we receive, if we generate 100 rand income for the university, this is now for the main budget purposes, 44 rand of that comes to this faculty. So we in fact get a little bit less than the 47%. It's a bit technical, so I'm not going to go into that now. But 44 rand comes to the faculty. 56% stays within institutional costs. And there you can see the institutional costs. That is things like equipment, operational costs. Oh, sorry, that's the 44 rand. Oh, okay, so let's park the 56 rand. Of that 44 rand, 1 rand goes to equipment. And every year when we do our budget, we make a substantial amount of money available for equipment. And I must say, for the last 6 years, most of that equipment has gone into research. And it's not small money. It's in the order of 6.5 million rand per year that we put into research, into equipment. Then 11 rand goes into operational costs. 50 cent, I must be honest, it says I cannot really see.
Technical, it's salaries of technical staff.
Oh, it's technical staff. Okay, sorry, you've got still good eyes, good. Then support staff is 11 rand, and then 20 rand goes to academic staff. And that is salaries and so forth. So that is how we distribute the 44 rand of the 100 rand. There is all the detail which I mean, you can have it, you can go through that, it's on your slides and so forth. That is just a detailed explanation of how that is put together. Okay, so I hope it works. I try to put this in a nice visual way to explain. as I said, I cannot really say much about fees must fall at the moment. I tried to give you a perspective of the financial realities with which we have to operate, within which we have to operate. If we don't follow this approach, then of course it's not viable to keep the business going, you know, as a going concern. So we are dependent on funding. The question is, where does the funding come from? And I think that is where the debate at the moment is, and where we as students and faculty and staff are currently working together. And I think it's important that we emphasize it's not the university against the students or the students against the university, but unfortunately the reality is the universities doesn't have the ability to resolve the financial problems on its own. We are dependent on the funding. The question is, where does it come from? And that is where the engagements currently are. There's a lot of discussions happening from the VC side on the national level, engaging with the minister and forums and so forth. And our hope is that by June next year we would hopefully have a sustainable solution to the funding problem. But the reality is we have to have funding in order to sustain our business. So the minister recently made an announcement, as you all know, about the 600,000 rand and middle group and so forth. We are currently waiting for more information in terms of how we're going to implement it next year, which basically means that any student with an income below 600,000 rand will not have an increase for next year. But the details needs to be worked out and how we're going to implement it and so forth. We're waiting for that information. Okay, so I hope that assists and to give you a better idea of what is the realities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mouton. I think that was very informative.